the two police officers in Times Square who were beaten quite badly. People were apprehended but then let go right away. Is this a turning point?
I don't think they would have been released as quickly because we can see the severity of their actions. These are uniformed officers conducting or trying to break up a party in a sense, and then they're attacked. And unfortunately, when you're seeing the history of the incident that took place at Times Square, there's no criminal history that's back there. If they came to the United States and we don't have true documentation of people, we don't know who they are.
If this had happened 10 years ago, what would have been the result? Would they have been released right away?
It's not the way it was 10 years ago with policing. We were definitely treated a little differently. There was more respect amongst the rank and file, with the job, and the public. You've seen a real turn against policing.
Welcome to New York Insider. Today we sit down with David Sarney. He's a professor at John Jay College and has served 27 years in the New York Police Department. So, David, thanks for being on New York Insider.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here.
It's great to have you. We've already talked a little bit about crime in New York, but I want to hear your perspective on this recent video that went viral. The two police officers in Times Square who were beaten quite badly, and the people were apprehended but then let go right away. Is this a turning point, perhaps?
This isn't necessarily a turning point. We've seen, unfortunately, assaults on police officers happen it seems to be more frequently than before. There's more information behind every investigation that we're not aware of. The release of those individuals, those perpetrators, and we've seen it happen in the past, are based on reforms that have taken place within New York State and New York City as far as bail eligible. Assault 2 felonies are bail eligible, but they have allowed certain things in the Criminal Justice Reform Act where it's not about the dangerousness of the perpetrator, it's not the dangerousness of the crime at times, it's more about is there a predisposition of them returning to court, and will these individuals have a history? And unfortunately, when you're seeing the history of the incident that took place at Times Square, there's no criminal history that's back there, but we also don't really know who they are. Grant you, we have fingerprints and the like, but what information do we have? If they came to the United States and we don't have true documentation of these people, we don't know who they are. So we're basing it on their information and fingerprints. And if those fingerprints don't come back to anything in New York, within the United States, we're identifying them as such and such.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so this incident, you've just said a whole lot there.
Yeah.
The two officers assaulted by, what, six?
A number. I did about 6, 7. Yeah, we don't have
6 or 7, right. And we do note that they were immigrants. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
It's apparently from what we're investigating. These people were from the a shelter area, from one of the hotels.
From a shelter area.
Yeah.
If this had happened 10 years ago, before these reforms that you just mentioned, what would have been the result? Would they have been released right away?
If we're dealing with the times, I don't think they would have been released as quickly because we can see the severity of their actions. These are uniformed officers conducting or trying to break up a party in a sense. And then they're attacked. You would, at one point, we with the prosecutor's office, DA's offices, we understood that together. It was more of a partnership. It seems to be more adversarial from what we're seeing now. And not only that, you're seeing that the reforms that have happened, there's a timestamp now with, as far as investigations are concerned and evidence. So I believe they released them because they didn't believe there was enough evidence available, but we don't really get an answer in the beginning. And I think we have to understand that it's not the way it was 10 years ago with policing. We were definitely treated a little differently. There was more respect amongst the rank and file, with the job, and the public. You've seen a real turn against policing. And with that, you're seeing a turn where laws have changed to more protect the perpetrators than the victims that we're seeing.
So can you be specific? So in 10 years, let's say, there's been this sea change, or a pretty substantial change.
Yes.
And I've heard you say now there's legislation, there's law behind this, but there's also, in a pre-conference call we were talking about, this the anti-police movement defund the police, has certainly trickled down into the streets and has a real effect. Walk us through some particulars there.
You're seeing, and not only are you seeing that, you're seeing the decline and the distrust within prosecutors, because you're dealing with younger prosecutors, younger attorneys, and a younger population who is now really feeling they do not see any accountability. So they have accountability for their actions. They think police don't have accountability, thereby they do not. But police are accountable. They're accountable for their actions at all times. That's their job. You know, there are always safety valves in order to deal with police officers who violate the law or are using excessive force. There are. But you've allowed this narrative to affect policing, police officers, and people's attitudes, whether it be the media, because most of the times when you see media, you're seeing negative aspects of police as opposed to what we were doing in the past. Positive stuff.
Accountability for police, you just mentioned. That is maybe a good segue into the recently, what do you say, over-vetoed How Many Stops Act, right? Yes. Mayor Adams vetoed it, but then recently the city council overwhelmingly passed it. And this is about accountability. Had you been on the council, where would your vote have gone?
Based on the legislations there, it's flawed data. It's incorrectly done. What it was pursued by the public advocate is the data itself is going to be flawed, because if you're not getting names, definitive information, based on what I read in his statement, or at least I read it on his site, you could kind of guess. You're making a guess as to their ethnicity, their racial background, their gender. And if we're worried about misgendering people or misidentifying people, you're already creating that. So how is that information going to be effective in any accountability?
All right, so you're saying these level 1 and 2 stops that will now have to be documented, right? Is that?
Yeah.
There's some guesswork involved. You don't necessarily have to talk with you don't necessarily have to get the person to give their information.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah, correct. You're not getting information, so you may have to just guess as to who you're speaking to. And that's a problem. So what's the issue? What is the definition of data? Data you need to definitively explain certain items, certain criteria. You're now giving us flawed information, so it's going to be flawed data. And level 1, level 2 stops, if you're asking them, it's going to take 20, 30 seconds. I worked in the job for 27 years. I've asked the cops who are on the field. There is no form that's going to take 30 seconds to do any time. And I've done it 27 years, and as a detective, there's nothing that takes 30 seconds. So you're asking for people to either recollect, remember what they did, document it somewhere in their phones, because now we don't document for your paper. Now you create paper. Now you're creating stops that may be determined as to what their ethnicity is. So if I misidentify someone's ethnicity, thereby I create that stop to be flawed. Because if I'm saying they're black, and that would be, I don't know how they're going to identify, but usually the way it is black, Hispanic, white, Hispanic. But if that person is Hispanic and dark-skinned, and we don't know that, we're identifying as black, thereby, are we identifying them properly? So now you stop a person who is a dark-skinned Hispanic or a light-skinned black. Now you're in a guessing game, and it's not beneficial. It's not beneficial to anybody.
What do they hope to accomplish from this, do you think?
Their answer is transparency and accountability, and I'm a big stickler on what does that mean. When you say transparency, we already have the level 3 stops that are being documented. We have vehicle stops that are being documented clearly based on the local law that's already been established. This level 1, level 2 stop is actually going to hinder an active investigation. Let's say there is a shots fired that goes on in a neighborhood, and preliminary investigation, police are going to respond to the scene, and they're going to ask people questions. And there may be 5 people in that group, and it's a level 1 stop. And the 5 people now I have to identify as whatever age, race, gender they are within that group. Or they walk away. So I'm going to have to guess what they are. So and that's going to slow up the investigation. What did you see? What did you hear? No, I just have to stop. I have to take this information down. So then I move on to the next case. Or let's say a missing child or an abduction. Anytime we make an investigative encounter, you're now telling us to stop and ask them all this information. And it's going to slow the process up. It's going to endanger the safety of and integrity of a case by having cops worrying more about documenting a stop than looking for the perpetrator.
We hear from the public advocate and the supporters of the bill that the number of stops are overwhelmingly of non-white people. And clearly, it seems, or correct me if I'm wrong, that the How Many Stops Act is trying to address that by offering more transparency, I guess asking the question, why are there so many people of color? So if people at level 3, we already have level 3 stops are overwhelming number of non-whites. Mm-hmm. Level 1 and 2 presumably also could be an overwhelming number of non-whites. What's to be done about it? Is that solving any problem by having more data? Even you're saying the data may be flawed, but whatever data comes out of it, what are they going to do with it?
The main thing is the complaint has been is 1 in 4 stops are unconstitutional based on the study that was done. So if you're saying 25% of the level 3 stops are unconstitutional, are we not going to fix that? Mm. What's the addition to do 1 and 2? All you're doing is either giving flawed data, but my whole thing is then it, as the mayor said, and I truly believe, it's about training. It's about continuous training, where we have the legal bureau, which the NYPD has, which is we have attorneys who work for the police department, both uniformed and civilians. More training to engage these officers who are making these stops to determine what is a level 3 stop, what is the constitutionality of this stop. Not only that, are they documenting the stop accurately? So if I'm going to do a level 1 and 2 stop that's going to have bad information, and the level 3s already probably could have flawed information already, why are we not worrying about looking at that aspect of it as opposed to the 1 and 2s? All you're going to do is you're creating, that's unfortunate self-fulfilling prophecy. You're going to see people of color, and if they're misidentified, so what's the difference? Are you making this beneficial? Is this beneficial to do anything? Or are you creating a divide between the community and the police that are there to serve the community?
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned one of the other big reasons that they're giving for this is 1 in 4 stops are unconstitutional. This is determined by a federal monitor. Mm-hmm. And I think you're saying this is not going to help stop the unconstitutionality of these 1 in 4.
No.
Is that right?
How is it going to stop it? All you're doing is adding more data that's flawed. Instead of saying, listen, what can we do? And the problem has been throughout this whole criminal justice reform is that we, or actually law enforcement plus the district attorney's offices, have not been at the table. This has all been on one side. It's been a one-sided event for the entire process. And it's like, okay, you have unconstitutional stops. So what are you going to do about it? That's the question. Let us sit down and see what we can do as to fixing that problem.
There's been no discussion.
It seems to be, and this law that's being put in, this How Many Stops Act, has no interaction with law enforcement. The Criminal Justice Reform Act, not one law enforcement agency, prosecutor's office, was involved in the changes.
That was 2018, 2019?
Yes, 2018, 2019. And when it came down...
From Albany.
Yeah. And it had no one engaged. And every law enforcement agency said, where is our input? We are the professionals dealing with these situations. It seems to be people who have absorbed and, whether or not properly, this anti-police sentiment on everything. But if you're going to fix the problem, fix that problem, the unconstitutionality stops, not add more information and data that will create a self-fulfilling prophecy or bad data. What's the data import?
Do we know why these 1 in 4 stops are unconstitutional?
They're basing, when we make stops or when police make Terry stops, that's what they call the Terry stops, level 3, there has to be reasonable suspicion as to that fact. And it has to be either articulated, documented somewhere along the line as that. And they took a very small percentage of those stops and determined those being flawed. So if we're looking at the flaw, how do you fix the flaw? You don't add something. You don't just add another thing to it. You find out what the flaw is.
Do we know what the flaw is?
The flaw has been either, and this is what unfortunately with law enforcement and everybody, we don't document fully and accurately what we're doing, or we cannot explain clearly as to what we're doing, why we're making a stop.
So the documentation is bad?
It can be bad because at one point with the old 250 forms, which was the stop and frisk, there were check boxes. And it was furtive movements and locations, criminal activity and the like, and there was a small narrative you would put in. And the narrative really sometimes didn't meet the check boxes that were there. And you could say then that's a flawed stop because the officer who made the stop didn't clearly explain as to why he stopped that person.
So that perhaps is the reason for the unconstitutional finding?
It's a possible reason. I looked at some of the documentation, but I haven't seen all of the body camera video. I haven't seen the forms
Who
that
has?
they filled out. They were part of the monitors. There were several monitors involved, several attorneys involved in observing these stops. It was usually, I think it was from the community. It was from stops made by a unit within the NYPD, and they based that on their answers. But if the officer is not trained fully into explaining and documenting what they're doing, it can look like an inappropriate, unconstitutional stop.
In How Many Stops Act, I don't think there's anything about training. It's going to be implemented in the next half of the year.
Yes.
In the later half of the year, we have several months between now and then. Mm-hmm. Is there going to be more training?
There will be, but I don't know. You're dealing with about a 33,000 plus member police department. There'll be another form released. They will be training either in person or online, depending on how the situation weighs itself. And not only that, what are you going to put as the form? There's no explanation. The police department will figure out they have a unit within that will be able to do this organization mapping and planning, OMAP. But are the questions going to be answered properly? And what do you do? And not only that, what considers investigative stop? If someone asks me directions for Penn Station, is that investigative stop encounter by me? Or if I give directions to somebody, is not to become investigative encounter? They're saying it's not, but now on video, let's say it sounds like it. All of a sudden, now where's the form that you're supposed to do for that? You're opening something that really isn't about fixing a problem. It's just developing more paper. And unfortunately, it's going to be paper that's not accurate. It's not going to be accurate. And if you already have inaccurate paperwork on the level 3 stops, why are you doing level 1 and level 2? That is definitely going to be inaccurate.
A lot of training would be needed, I guess, to fix the 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's always continuous training with the NYPD. Okay. Anytime something, unfortunately, we do, it's sometimes very reactive with the training. You're going to have proactive training, obviously, now with this level 1, level 2 stop. But it's always been training and consistency. But also the officers have to realize they have to be more cognizant of how they document. And it's something you always try to instill in investigators and cops, that you have to be, there's no more just broad brush. It has to be more detailed than what you write down.
What's the police department like today as opposed to 10 years ago?
Definitely under siege, both administratively, politically, more so than it's been. You have a younger department, some very, very positive in most departments when you have such a large group, and some already burnt out within 2-3 years. They're trying to change tours and policies and protocols to try to install some sort of normalcy and discipline with the department, with the changes with facial hair and the like, going back to the old school ways. Trying to reduce the amount of appearances for cops to come to work. The NYPD has probably the most appearances of any law enforcement agency. Trying to change the development of assignments for details. I know they're looking into doing that. There are positives going along the way. Developing a health and wellness and understanding of resiliency, but you're still having cops dealing with the community that has been kind of anti-us the last few years, and I don't know when it will change. And there's always been arguments against police, and we've been cursed at and screamed at. You've always will have that, but the silent majority was always in your corner. It seems that the silent majority has really, disappeared, and you're seeing more. And politicians used to think of us as at least that opportunity to fix the city. You want to be the safest city in the United States, and it's been done time and time again the last decade or so. When you create this divisiveness, though, you're now this us versus them mentality, which we've been trying to fight for years as cops, and with the community. That whole thing, you're just adding another barrier with this act.
I see. I wonder if we could go back to that the viral incident from Times Square. There have been others like it. These are definitely on the rise.
It seems to be more, and I believe the reason why you're seeing more of them is because of social media and videos, and they're being disseminated much more. But there have been assaults on in the past. You're just seeing now more record of it via video, via these viral videos. But they've always happened. They can always happen. It just seems to be more. There's more violence to them, I think. And now you're having individuals who don't even reside here, who don't live in the United States, responding in kind like that. And you're seeing the first time, anytime conflict happens, the first thing that comes out is not a call to 911 when an officer's getting injured, is put it on video and send it out. So these are ebbs and flows. You're now seeing a rise in police, in anti-police violence, in the best way of putting it. These aren't protests. These aren't about reform. These are about injuring cops. And it's got to stop. And we have to really set a tone. And that comes from and stems from the prosecutor's office and the legislators to really revisit the laws that are enacted and maybe change them, as opposed to just saying, well, they should be deported, but you've done things that you disallow that opportunity if you're looking for that.
Yeah, a lot of problems coming in at, behind the immigrants post-COVID. I mean, the city's got a lot of problems that are not just related to the police, but it obviously makes the police officer's job a lot harder.
Absolutely. You're seeing, this is not unusual, but the influx has been where you're now displacing individuals, other homeless, from shelter to shelter. You're trying to stem a tide that we're not prepared, that the city is not prepared for financially, physically, with locations to reside people in. And the expectation for police to do more work and do more and do more. To do more with less works to a point, but if you're oversaturated and you are undermanned, and you're becoming undermanned because of so many retirements and the like, you're seeing what you're seeing now. I mean, I grew up in New York, and I remember the 70s and 80s, and they were bad, but this is something different, I think. It's a little different, where the randomness is the issue, because you used to kind of know where the criminality took place, and you knew how to do it. But now you're seeing people really not going on the trains. They refuse to go on the subway. They don't want to come to New York after dark. They go home. You're seeing businesses closing early. You're seeing businesses close because of the criminality going on in New York City, and more so than we saw in the past.
The randomness is a lot different.
Definitely randomness. You're seeing with these emotionally disturbed people are out there, and the violence that comes into play. We're still not really taking care of that issue. You're looking to close correctional facilities like Rikers. There's really no plan to deal with these mentally ill individuals while they're incarcerated. I don't know if there's funding or not for that. You're just seeing this cycle continue, and all you see is sort of this piecemeal. We'll just write more paperwork to cover it. It's like it's not covering it. What are the deep issues? How do we get people to want to work within this society? We want to fix the mentally ill. We need more social. We need more mental health professionals within the correctional facilities to do that. You've limited the amount of incarcerated people. We're just going to release more. But are those people who are the mentally ill getting the help they need when they're released? And I don't know if we're doing the right thing by anybody.
You entered the police force in the 90s?
1995.
From growing up in the 70s, 80s, things were really rough. By the 90s, they had already started to clean up substantially.
It was a bit. I had friends on the police department at that point in the 90s. You knew the areas, like drug use was rampant. You had the East Village was the East Village, and that's where I'd hang out in Brooklyn. You wouldn't go. I would never go to Yankee Stadium when I was a kid because it was just that violent in the trains. There was people being pushed on the train tracks back in the 80s, so it's not unusual. It's just now you're seeing either more knowledge of it from...
With the social media.
Yes, social media's been a thing. You're seeing a change in the populace because old-timers, we're considered leftovers. New Yorkers have already changed, and now you have new generations coming in. Right. Seeing this city and seeing the criminality and seeing that all this is like, why is this happening? And a lot of it, it could be fixed. These can be fixed if we work together. It just seems everybody is adversarial. It's just legislators look at the police as evil, and that's not how it works. We're all here to do the right thing, and we have to, and it has to be understood by everybody. We need to do the right thing for the victims, the working people of New York City, the people who, the silent majority, the people who aren't the perpetrators of these crimes. We seem to coddle these perpetrators as victims, when the victims are just sort of pushed to the side and just ignored at a point. Why are stores closing? And you say, if you can't keep saying these loaves of bread they're looking for, there's other reasons why these places are being, closed and being property taken. Look at the real in-depth things. The broad brush, need the details. We need detail-oriented operations within the city to look at the laws.
So things are getting worse than they have been in the last 10 years, but it can be fixed because it happened before. It was fixed before. And was it about, in the 90s, were people coming together, all the players here?
There was, I believe, more of a change in policy with policing. When Bill Bratton came in the first time, he and the mayor, Giuliani, at the time, had a very zero-tolerance policy. The idea of broken windows, policing, dealing with the smaller crimes so the bigger crimes don't happen. And it was a very zero-tolerance policy. Unfortunately, it became a monster in a sense, because now you have crime so low, now how do we make it lower? And then you really pursue things that necessarily shouldn't have been pursued at that point. You start
Overreach.
Over policing.
Over policing.
And I think when Bill Bratton came back the second time, he understood that. And it was sort of, we're looking for quality over quantity, we're looking for precision policing, we're looking to get the bad actors involved, and we need to get those bad actors and get them off the streets. And if you're dealing with such a small percentage of people doing shoplifting, creating most of the shoplifting issues, so why are we not focusing on the precision policing and enforcement and prosecution of those cases? But the laws that have been enacted kind of limit that ability to prosecute those cases fully. So
there's just a lot of divisiveness right now, a lot of divide from your perspective. Is that right? So when's it getting better?
When everybody starts realizing that what they did needs to be changed. You need to, it's not about reform, it's about repair. Repair the system. Repair it. Reforming it, we've seen the reforms, you can throw numbers and statistics out there. The perception of crime in New York City is extremely high. It's very negative in New York. You need to show that we're doing something. And with the laws that are enacting is not changing the problem. It's just covering a problem. Got it. We know what needs to be done. Everyone does. It seems to be we're just ignoring that problem.
In a pre-interview conversation, you told me about Robert Peel, who is the father of modern policing. And I did a little reading on him. What he said and what his department laid out is as relevant 200 years ago as it is today. Can you tell us a little bit about Robert Peel and his influence on your policing and your outlook?
I'll give it as this, because I was watching a webinar with Commissioner Bratton, and he brought up the fact that he always kept this little piece of paper called Peel's Principles of Policing, and he was kept in his pocket. And then I said, let me look into this, because in my teaching thing, I said, since I teach at John Jay, maybe bring this to the forefront. And as I read it, as I'm looking at it, it does model a lot of things still that exist then exist now. And one of the things that always sticks to me is, and I'll paraphrase because I'm not going to have it exactly, the police are the public and the public are the police. And there's your answer. You vilified policing so much that no one wants to do it. But you need the police because the public needs that. It needs that protection. It needs that security to say, by the way, I'm getting on the train to myself at midnight. I want to see if there's a cop available. And where these cops come from is that they're not grown in a cubicle. They're not grown in a farm. They're all coming from the neighborhoods, from the city. The animosity with policing has really created people not wanting to be police officers. You've got to bring that back and realize we work together. The community needs the police. We need the community to help solve some of the crimes out there, to help get these people who are committing these crimes off the street and prosecuted. And without the public's help, a lot of times they don't get prosecuted. So, and maybe not even solved. That murders may not be solved because the public has decided that the police are corrupt, the police are bad, I should not get involved. But it's all about us. It's about everybody. I lived in New York all my life. And, you know, I've seen good and bad in everybody. Good and bad in police, good and bad in the public. We need to get that back. If people would really look at it and expect that, because expect that from police, it might change things. I don't know if anyone in the city council has ever read it or ever looked at it.
The Peel's principles?
Yes. And I think it's something to look at, because the legitimacy of the police is based on the public's perception, the public's desire for that. And we've seen such a negative attitude toward policing. We've got to change that attitude. We've got to find, and it's like, what do you want? What do we need to do? We have to sit down. And I know other commissioners have tried to do that, but I think it comes down to is you need to get everyone on the table. What do we need to get fixed? Where are the issues? And the stops, constitutionality, what do you think? You know, I remember people were offered to do ride-alongs, and they've declined. So you didn't even want to get that perspective. So how can you say policing is bad if you've never actually been in a car? Or how can you say what's being done by police is unconstitutional if you've not seen it? You're reading it, and I don't know, and I'll say this, I've actually watched city council hearings on certain things, and I don't think they understand what policing is. They may not understand it. They're getting a false narrative, and I think if they really look at that document, the principles, whether or not Sir Robert Peel wrote it or not, doesn't matter. It does outline a lot of things we're looking for police to do. It comes to treatment of the public, it comes to use of force, it comes to community relations. A lot of that comes from there. And that's why I appreciated when I saw that webinar with Commissioner Bratton, and he brought it up, and I never thought of it. I heard about it, but never really looked at it. And I thought it was something that really, I don't know if the police officers see it that much. I bring it to the forefront in my classes, more so now, and I'm doing it with my other classes, to see this is what it is. This is what you should expect from policing. And this is what the community, because we work together, in a sense. We work for the public. And the public become police. Because when I retire, someone took my place.
Yeah.
So, we leave. But
that's heartening to hear that you're bringing that into your classroom. But it's also shocking to me that you don't think a lot of police officers know about these principles.
They are actually,
and even more than that the council, who are their bosses, don't know about principles.
I'd like to see that, and I'd love to see a poll whether or not. But in the police academy itself, they're actually on the steps as you go up toward the to the gym. There are a lot of the principles written all throughout the area. When I got the job in '95, never heard of it. I will say that. I did not hear of it in the academy and never thought of it. It never came up because we were worried about enforcement and things like that. But if you really look to where, and I can't say the training for recruits includes that because I don't do training for the recruits, but when it comes to senior detectives and things like that, many of them may not know. Many of them may not know what that means. And I don't think community members understand that or even saw it or even know about it. So it's a good start. Even though it's almost 200 years old at this point, it does lay a good foundation for policing in any department, in any agency, small police departments or larger police departments. And it's a good foundation to at least read about, and then you can work from there because, again, it's a foundation. And foundations start somewhere. So maybe that would be a good way to look.
Would you want everyone on the council to spend 10 minutes reading them?
I would sit down with the council reader with them, and I would sit there and just find out what do they understand about police. And I don't know if they do. They may have had poor encounters, and I cannot deny they may have, or some negative aspects to police. But let's see how we can fix that problem, as opposed to saying, let's just add another piece of legislation that hinders what police do.
Thanks a lot for coming on New York Insider. We'd love to have you back again. You have a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for
much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you for having me come here. Thank you. Appreciate it.